안녕하세요. My name is Brad Coughlan. I'm the Government Industry Lead for Amazon Web Services in Asia Pacific and Japan. And it is my pleasure to welcome you back from your lunch and to thank you for joining us for our summit here in Seoul on this wonderful, wonderful day. I'd like to take you through 5 things in my presentation over the next 40 minutes or so. I'd like to talk to you about market momentum that we're seeing with Amazon Web Services globally and how that applies to the public sector. I'd like to talk to you about transformation, how organisations similar to your organisations are using Amazon Web Services to transform the way their businesses serve their citizens and their end customers. I'd like to talk to you about freedom. I'm going to talk to you about the 7 freedoms that we see public sector customers typically striving for around the globe. How they are freeing themselves up from traditional approaches to delivering IT-enabled services and reinventing them, transforming them with newfound freedoms on AWS cloud services. 4, I'd like to talk to you about some of the barriers for public sector agencies that are preventing them from adopting AWS cloud services sooner and in greater quantities. And then lastly, I would like to summarise and talk to you about some resources that are available to you to help you learn more about what Amazon Web Services could be doing for you in the public sector and how to commence your journey to the cloud. Does that sound like good use of your time for the next 40 minutes? Let's proceed. Firstly, let's talk about momentum in the marketplace. As Mike Clayville said in the keynote presentation this morning, Gartner produced its Magic Quadrant for cloud infrastructure as a service providers in May of last year. This is the 5th year that Gartner has been producing the Cloud IaaS Magic Quadrant, and it's also the 5th year that Amazon Web Services has been in the number 1 position in the top right-hand corner. The Magic Quadrant talks about completeness of vision on one axis and the ability to execute on the other axis. So those IT vendors that are best placed as far as their vision and their ability to execute on that vision are in the top right-hand quadrant, or as Gartner likes to call it, the Magic Quadrant. If you were to take the other 14 vendors in this Magic Quadrant, other than Amazon Web Services, and you were to grab all of their compute capability and to put it in one bucket, then Amazon Web Services cloud compute capability is 10 times the bucket of all the other 14 IT vendors combined. Mike also mentioned that we are the fastest enterprise IT vendor to reach a US $10 billion run rate. So to put that in context, many of us have come from IT backgrounds where our organisations were heavily invested in capabilities from other IT vendors such as EMC or Microsoft or Oracle. To compare the rate at which Amazon Web Services is growing, to become a $10 billion run rate company took EMC 27 years. To become a $10 billion run rate company took Oracle 23 years. It took Microsoft 22 years. It's taken Amazon Web Services 10 years to become the fastest growing IT enterprise vendor in the market today. As you saw from the keynote earlier today, we have a very broad and rich ecosystem of systems integrators. Many of these systems integrators will be familiar to you here in Korea. SIs such as Accenture, Infosys, CSC, and many others. We also have a broad ecosystem of independent software vendors. Many of you may be surprised to find that a number of the ISVs on this slide are very close partners of Amazon Web Services. Microsoft workloads run extremely well on Amazon Web Services. Oracle workloads run extremely well on Amazon Web Services. SAP runs extremely well on Amazon Web Services. We partner with those three ISVs and many others on the slide behind me to deploy their software or their solutions on Amazon Web Services because that's what our customers continue to ask us for. We also have the largest number of enterprise customers. Many of these logos will be familiar to you. Samsung, General Electric, Dow Jones, Coca-Cola, Bosch, Novartis, and many others, all deploying a significant number of workloads in production on Amazon Web Services. We also have the largest number of startup customers. Though if you were to look at a number of the logos on this slide, you could argue that many of them are no longer startups. They're enterprises in their own right today. But many of these began life as a startup with a small amount of venture capital that they had to make go a long way so that they could try a number of ideas. Try, fail, stop. Try, fail, stop. Try, fail, stop. Until they came across that one workload, that one application or that one solution that became the nucleus of the large-scale enterprise that they are today. Enterprises that were startups like Airbnb, like Pinterest, like Spotify, like Shazam. We also have the largest number of public sector customers. Some of you may already know that NASA is a significant Amazon Web Services customer. Many of their mission-critical workloads run on AWS, and many of the workloads that underpin the Mars Curiosity mission were all running on Amazon Web Services. The US Center for Disease Control, or CDC, runs the majority of its production workloads on Amazon Web Services. Mission-critical, agile, timely solutions that need to react to emerging disasters quickly and confidently. FINRA, the Financial Regulatory Authority in the US, that monitors security and market transactions every day. They build a data mart and an analytics engine on Amazon Web Services that enables them to analyze in near real time 75 billion transactions per day. Vincent, my counterpart, will talk to you about the education sector in the session immediately after this. He'll also highlight the work being done by universities such as Open Universities Australia, Notre Dame, Carnegie Mellon, and Seoul National University. There are large national postal authorities who are running the majority of their production workloads today on Amazon Web Services. Singapore Post implemented a very complex e-commerce solution that would have taken more than a year using traditional approaches in under 3 months on Amazon Web Services. Australia Post, I'll talk about towards the end of the session, has automated its entire software automation process so that it can now deliver in the space of minutes something that in the past, using a traditional waterfall approach, took them more than 55 days to reproduce. We also have a growing number of Korean customers. Samsung, LG, Hyundai Logistics, Asiana Airlines, running production workloads on AWS. We have great startups developing mobile apps like Jikbang to enable students to find accommodation using mobile applications, like PickyCast to produce short video vignettes similar to Vine, and Yogiyo so that you can make sure your pizza gets there in time to go with your Boilermakers at night when you are celebrating with your friends. There's a growing number of gaming companies betting their businesses on Amazon Web Services as well. My favourite one being Golf Zone. So in Australia, similar to you, we like to get together on the weekend. We can't always get to spend 6 hours on a golf course, but it's great to go to Golf Zone, play Pebble Beach, knock one down the middle, have a par round. We're also seeing an increasing take-up in the public sector now in Korea. Vincent will talk to you about our Educate program that's currently in use in universities like Seoul National University and Sogang University. He'll talk to you about our Activate for Students program, our incubation program that's being used by organisations such as Like Lion. So let's move to the second part of the presentation. Let's talk about transformation, how a public sector organisation's thinking and executing in a way that enables them to transform the way they provide services and support to their citizens and businesses. How many of you have seen Rogers' innovation adoption curve before? Excellent. Many of you have seen it. Everett Rogers wrote a book in 1962 called Diffusion of Innovations. And in his book, he put forward a theory that was based on a normalized distribution that says when new innovation comes to market, at first, only the most aggressive or pioneering of customers will look to adopt that new technology. And he called that classification innovators. Once people start to see innovators taking up that new technology, then the next wave of people who come through are called early adopters. Then the next wave are called the early majority. And when we get to the top of the distribution curve, we reach what we call tipping point, where more people than not are starting to adopt the technology. And as that momentum continues and they come past the crest of the hill, we see the late majority starting to come on board. And then eventually at the end of that process, we see the laggards or the slow coaches starting to come on board. So this is called Rogers' Innovation Adoption Curve. From my personal observation, some 3+ years ago, if I was to apply Rogers' adoption innovation curve to the marketplace for Amazon Web Services, I would have broken it into private sector and public sector. So some 3+ years ago, private sector were in the early majority. They'd climbed most of the hill and they were nearing the top of the hill. When they got to the top of the hill, they could see a range of benefits that cloud services could bring to their organisation. But while private sector customers were near the top of the hill, public sector customers were still at the bottom of the hill. Only the risk-taking public sector people would have been looking to cloud services 3+ years ago, while the majority of public sector people would have been closing their eyes and closing their ears, la 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 la, concentrating on all the risks associated with moving to the cloud. While private sector customers were focused on how they could use cloud services to leverage greater agility. better competitiveness in the marketplace, faster speed to market, lowering their cost base, shifting from a capital expenditure-based model to an operating expenditure-based model. Having the ability to fail fast, fail cheaply, but fail often, to try out the 99 ideas that don't work before they reach that one idea that does work. They thought about cloud services in terms of the new products it would now enable them to bring to market that were not feasible beforehand, perhaps, or new products that they could bring to market. While at the very same time, their public sector counterparts were sitting there going, oh, what about security? What about compliance? What about data sovereignty? Where does my data live? Is it still in country? What about the risks associated with this newfangled cloud service? What about all my legacy applications? What do I do with those? What about the brand new shiny data center we built last year that's got a 9-year business case still to run? What about my sensitive data? I'm responsible for personally identifiable information that I just can't hand over to any vendor willy-nilly. And what about public sector procurement processes? We have to go through tender processes. We have to evaluate. We have to shortlist. We have to do demonstrations. We have to do best and final offer. We have to do contract negotiations. And then usually we appoint one or more to a panel that provide the services to us. I'm happy to say that today, most of our private sector customers have moved past tipping point and are at that late majority phase. While also, we see our public sector customers moving up the hill at some pace and now becoming the early majority for adopting cloud services for many of their production workloads. I often say to my team when I work with public sector customers, the impression I get is that no one wants to be first, but everyone wants to be second. So they're probably moving towards the top of that adopters curve at a faster pace than many of the private sector customers who have gone there before them. Why are we seeing public sector organisations pick up cloud services so quickly? 6 main reasons. They like the idea that they can trade multi-million-dollar capital expenses for variable operating expenses. No lock-in contracts, on-demand IT services delivered over the internet on a pay-as-you-go basis. They like the fact that they can benefit from the massive economies of scale, where Amazon Web Services has 10 times the compute capacity of the 14 other vendors in the Magic Quadrant combined. They like the fact that they don't have to do capacity planning anymore. I used to be a CIO in a public sector organisation a long time ago. I used to dread 3-year out capacity planning. We used to look at what we did this year, add to it the workloads we thought we'd be adding to the infrastructure over the next 3 years, provision for risk, unknown capacity requirements, and build out an infrastructure that we needed to order 6 months in advance that we would hope provided the capacity we needed for the next 3 years. Sometimes we got it right. Supply mapped very closely to demand. Sometimes we got it wrong, and you can get it wrong 2 ways. If I build a lot of infrastructure, but I never ever use a lot of that capacity, I have very precious capital expenditure tied up in a resource that I cannot leverage. If I get it wrong on the other side, and I have underestimated capacity, then I have this much compute capacity, but at certain times my customers demand this much capacity, which I cannot deliver, then I end up with very unhappy customers and usually a very unhappy boss. Customers are looking to leverage our increased speed and agility to enable them to in turn react to requirements from citizens, from businesses, from the governments, from changes in policy, from changes in the regulatory environment far more quickly than they could ever do using a traditional approach to IT services. So when we talk to customers, we talk about helping them to remove undifferentiated heavy lifting. What are the IT workloads that do not differentiate your organisation from a bank or an airline or an electronics manufacturer? Standard IT infrastructure building blocks, data centres, racking, stacking, servers, networking, power, heating, cooling, UPS, all the things that we do very well that you cannot have to focus on, so that in turn you can focus on the things that differentiate the mission objectives for your department, your agency or your organisation. And finally, for some customers, not always for public sector, but certainly for many private sector customers, the ability to deploy a workload in one region and then within minutes provision that to any one of our other regions around the globe gives them a business advantage that they could never replicate if they were to try and build out their own global infrastructure. So let me talk about the third area. I introduced the concept of freedom before. Why do public sector customers want freedom? So my personal opinion, I think public sector customers have been watching private sector customers very closely. They've seen the freedom that their private sector counterparts are now enjoying, and they want that same freedom for their own departments and agencies. But public sector is a very fast follower. So we've assembled some thinking and some observations we've made regarding our dealing with public sector organisations for the 10 years that Amazon Web Services has been in business. And I'd like to introduce these to you today as our 7 basic freedoms. These are the freedoms that more and more of our public sector customers and the public sector customers that I talk to want to increasingly enjoy. They want the freedom to build. They want to be builders and inventors again. They do not want to be jockeys who ride IT infrastructure. They want the freedom to get real value from their data. Insights, real-time information that they can use to make better and faster decisions. They want the freedom to get their data into or out of the cloud easily. No mess, no fuss, no cost, no time. They want freedom from bad relationships, particularly bad database relationships. Our customers talk to us about enterprise databases, vendor lock-in. We listen to our customers. They want better solutions to proprietary database approaches. The 5th one is the freedom to migrate easily from their current on-premise IT infrastructure-based services to cloud-enabled services like those provided by Amazon Web Services. 6, they want the freedom to move fast, but they still want to make sure that their organisations and their data are inherently secure. And finally, public sector CIOs want to say yes more often. I used to get sick of saying no. People would come to me every day, we want one of these. No. We found a new tool that we'd like to use in production. No. We've got a new workload we'd like to run. No. We've seen a new database. We've seen a new 5-6 times a day. No. Some people cheekily put a sign on my door under my name that said, Dr. No. CIOs want the freedom to start saying yes. So let's talk about these 7 freedoms one at a time. The first one is the freedom to build. If you think about the depth and breadth of the Amazon Web Services platform, we have more than 70 services available today around the globe. If you think about the pace of innovation at Amazon Web Services, there's a statistic that says that Amazon releases a new change or a new feature or a new update into production using its agile development methodologies every 30 seconds of every day of every year. In 2014, we introduced 516 new services and features to the Amazon Web Services suite. Last year in 2014, we introduced 722 new services and features. This year, at the end of April, 1/3 of the way into the year, we'd already introduced more than 300 new services and features. So you can see that we're picking up speed and accelerating the innovation that we are driving into our own products and services. If you leverage that vast infrastructure technology platform and the fact that you can deploy your workloads on our services in minutes, those two in combination give you a business agility that you have never been able to enjoy to date. Let's talk about the second freedom. How do you get real value from your data? We listen a lot to our customers. When it comes to data, the conversations are usually around big data, and there are two aspects to the conversation. The data mart or the data lake, and how hard that is for public sector customers or any customers to get their heads around. How do I design, build and run one of these things? The other side of the equation are the tools that they then use to mine the data, to trawl the data, to get the gems, the nuggets of information that enable them to make better, smarter, faster decisions. So we introduced Amazon Redshift. Private sector customers took it up very, very quickly. At one stage, it was our fastest growing service, but public sector customers followed very close behind. Redshift is a fast, fully managed, petabyte scale data warehouse that you can deploy in minutes and pay for on an as-you-go basis. The other side of that equation is a service we announced at reInvent in October of last year called Amazon QuickSight. It frees you up from old guard business intelligence and analytics solutions that are cumbersome, expensive, and involve some degree of lock-in. It's fast and it's easy to use, and it provides you with business intelligence capability built on top of Amazon Cloud Services. Typically with QuickSight, your first analysis takes less than 1 minute. There's a new proprietary analytics engine called Spice that sits behind the queries that you'll run. We produce dynamic and beautiful visualizations that are equivalent of any other BI or analytics client you may be running today. You have the ability to share live and snapshot data across your organization with your customers, with your citizens, with your businesses. QuickSight integrates beautifully with the various database and back-end products that you'll be deploying on Amazon Web Services. But the key thing public sector customers like also is it's typically 1/10 of the cost of those old guard BI tools you may be using today. Let's talk about the freedom to get your data into and out of the cloud easily. Typically, customers move through a maturity spectrum from direct upload. Then they move to dedicated fiber circuits using Direct Connect. More recently, real-time streaming. And at the moment, everyone's talking about Internet of Things, IoT, connected devices. This morning, Mike mentioned Amazon Kinesis. So a suite of 3 different capabilities, from Kinesis Streams through to Kinesis Firehose for loading that streaming data into AWS, and then Kinesis Analytics for running standard SQL queries over that streaming data. Similarly, when we think of the connected devices, AWS IoT was launched in October of last year. And it tackles the 5 main concerns around Internet of Things and deals with those in an efficient and a simple manner. Implementing a device gateway that talks to the myriad of devices and sensors out there in the market. A rules engine that enables us to do something quickly and systematically with the data that we are reviewing from those devices. Device shadowing. Not all devices are connected all the time. How do we deal with that when many of these devices are in a binary state? They're either off or they're on at various times. How do we make sure security is built in from the ground up? So encrypting the data in transit and at rest. And how do we maintain a sophisticated protocol for maintaining connectivity with these various devices? The fourth one is freedom from database relationships. Bad relationships in many cases. Old world databases that we've all used and may well be using today can be very expensive. They can be proprietary in nature. They involve a degree of lock-in. Once you've locked yourselves into that particular vendor's ecosystem, training, support, tooling, deployment, management. And the licensing regimes can be quite punitive in some cases, and they can limit the flexibility that you have as an organisation. We listen to our customers, and last year we launched Amazon Aurora. It's an enterprise-grade database solution at an open source price point. MySQL compatible, 5 times the performance of a traditional MySQL implementation, highly available, 1/10 the cost again of a typical enterprise database solution, and at the moment our fastest growing AWS service. When you combine that with our database migration service and the new schema conversion tool that we have, you have an elegant end-to-end solution that enables you to convert your schema, tables, partitions, and sequences, convert your functions, whether they're views, stored procs, triggers, and various functions, and then use the database migration service to seamlessly migrate them to target platforms like Amazon Aurora. The freedom to migrate. This journey is a well-trodden path for many of our private sector customers, and it is increasingly the same path that many of our public sector customers take. With some public sector customers, development and test may not apply. Some of our public sector customers got out of the business of designing and building software many years ago. But for those who still do this, this is often the first workload that moves to Amazon Web Services. Once they become comfortable with that, they'll experiment with brand new applications, a small mobile app, a small web application perhaps. Then they'll look at their digital footprint, digital assets such as their website, their intranets, their corporate delivery networks. Then they'll look at analytics. How do I take the data that's stored and locked in various back-end proprietary systems, and bring it together in such a way that I can analyse it cheaply and effectively? Then they'll look at pure play, net new mobile applications. Then they'll start to think about, do I need to rebuild another data centre? Could I take things out of my old data centre and move to Amazon Web Services? Then they start to tackle mission critical line of business applications, ERPs, finance, payroll, mission critical workloads. And then finally, we see some customers go all in. So out of the business of undifferentiated heavy lifting and moving their critical IT services to AWS. Many customers still maintain hybrid architectures, as do public sector customers, and they will continue to do so, leveraging existing investments in directory platforms, database platforms, operating systems, technical expertise, management tools. But again, customers are also going all in. Universities, mainstream enterprises, financial companies, banks. The sixth one is the freedom to secure your cake and eat it too. Jay Heiser from Gartner made a point recently of saying that CIOs and Chief Information Security Officers need to stop obsessing over unsubstantiated cloud security worries. The first objection I get in conversations with public sector people, 9 times out of 10, will be around security or compliance. Once a public sector customer has come on board, most of those customers will then acknowledge that the Amazon security and compliance posture that they now enjoy is in most cases superior to their own data centers that they are running when we first introduced ourselves. So with Amazon, we take care of the security of the cloud so that you as customers can focus on defining your controls and running your workloads in the cloud. As Mike said this morning, we have a broad range of accreditations and certifications from standardized operating controls 1, 2, and 3 through ISO 27000 and many country-specific standards. So the old days of having to choose between do I move fast or do I stay secure are now gone, and customers are able to do workloads on AWS that enable them to move fast and stay secure at the same time. So finally, to the freedom to say yes. Startups like these have been saying yes with AWS from day one. Enterprises like this have been saying yes to digital transformation from day one. Customers like these are now saying yes to innovation on AWS. So I leave with you our 7 basic freedoms for you to consider as you develop your strategies and your plans for what your individual organisation's journey to the cloud may look like. So finally, to barriers in public sector. We believe by removing barriers using some of the examples we've talked about with the freedoms, not only can you pave the way for disruptive innovation within your own organisations, but you can also concentrate less on the undifferentiated heavy lifting and move to a posture where you can start to make the world a better place. There are practical steps for governments moving to the cloud. There are 5 levels we need to get through before we reach a point where you can broadly adopt Amazon-backed cloud services for many of your workloads. There are policy and definition issues to work through, then security and compliance, then acquisition and procurement, then changing the culture of your organisation and reskilling your employees, and then getting to broad adoption. We have practical things we can do to help you strategize, plan, and execute on that journey. We have considerations you should take in mind for how to procure cloud services. We have cloud adoption frameworks that lay out a structured approach to how you should transition to the cloud, when and why. We have guidance on risk and compliance in a cloud services world on AWS. And we have over 16 reference architectures that will show you step by step how to implement 16 of the most common workloads you are likely to put on Amazon Web Services. So gone are the old days where you invested millions of dollars in expensive, inflexible, slow-moving infrastructure that was frozen in time. By leveraging the pace of innovation at Amazon Web Services, you now move to a point where you are in the new world of cloud services. Lower variable costs, a broad and deep platform, new features that are arriving almost daily, and something that's ready to deploy in minutes. In closing, I'd just like to summarize a couple of things for you. Amazon Web Services has significant momentum in the public sector. We work every day with more than 2,000 government agencies across the world, 5,000 education institutions, and more than 17,500 non-profit organisations. We have a range of solutions that public sector customers are deploying on Amazon Web Services that range from sanitation and air transportation right through to street maintenance, job creation, and healthcare. We have customers like Australia Post who are condensing development projects from 12 months to 3 months by utilising an approach that instead of taking 50 days and costing $87,000 based on the old way of implementing applications, to automating their entire data center infrastructure such that they can spin it up in 6 to 8 minutes at a cost of less than US $20 per hour. Not only is this a well-trodden path to the cloud, it's increasingly becoming a well-trodden path for public sector customers as well. Cloud is not only the new normal, as Mike said in his presentation this morning, but cloud is also fast becoming the new normal in public sector as well. My name is Brad Coughlan. My associate Daniel Kim is in the audience. These are his contact details. Thank you, Daniel. He would be happy to do any follow-up with you. Thank you for your time this afternoon. 고맙습니다.